So, I've had quite a few people in the comments tell me that upgrading the head unit on their Aygo from a standard one to an Apple Carplay Android Auto unit was the best thing they ever did. So I decided to fit one. Good news first, the install is actually pretty easy and you can do it in about 15 minutes with minimal tools. Make sure to turn the engine off first, and then quite literally you can grab the faceplate and pull it away from the housing underneath. But do keep in mind that the hazard light will be connected with wiring, so don't pull too hard. It's then a case of taking the air vent cover off, which you can also pull off with light pressure. This will reveal two screws on the top of the head unit that you can unscrew with a standard Phillips head screwdriver, and that air vent cover actually makes a handy place to store the screws too. Once the screws are out, you can pull the whole unit towards you with gentle pressure and it should just pop out. Don't pull too hard though, as there are a lot of wires connected around the back and you really don't want to be damaging any of those. Taking a quick look around back reveals all the wires, and it's just a case of bringing the head unit as close to you as you can and reaching through the small opening in the back to remove everything. Most of the wires should come out pretty easily, and any that don't, you can use an interior removal tool. Once out, it's actually useful to compare the new model and the old model. We'll be going from this 2-button one to a 3-button one, and by the way, that is the simplest way to really tell the head units apart. Simply put, 2-button head units don't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, but 3-button head units do. So don't be fooled by people trying to tell you an apple is an orange. Looking at these units from the side, the new Apple CarPlay enabled unit looks slightly taller and a bit thicker too. So that's another way you can tell you're looking at the upgraded unit and not the bog standard one. But there are some misunderstandings which are important, and we'll get to those in a moment. Now it's just a case of installing the new head unit in the same fashion as we took the old one out, by clipping all the inputs back in and then lightly nudging the head unit back into place. But before we screw everything down and put faceplates back on, it's probably best to check that it works, isn't it? Because Apple CarPlay Android Auto works via the USB port on the Aygo, you have to get your poison of choice up and running by plugging your phone into the USB port. Once in, they start to talk to each other and prompt you for a few permissions. For me, because I use an iPhone, it asks for permissions for Siri, and weirdly, you need to keep these permissions on in order for CarPlay to not throw a fit. I tried turning the listening for Siri option off and I got it all connected and it didn't like that at all. So if you are privacy conscious, you really don't have a bloody choice. However, once done, you have this glorious smart screen that is actually useful, and while we are here, we might as well test a few more of the functions out and set it up, which is something I did after the fact. First thing I want to do is to get rid of the horrid beep, and we'll set the time and date while we're here too. One thing that caught my eye immediately was the date format. It doesn't look right to me. Normally in the UK the format tends to be date, month, year, but this one is the inverse of that. So it makes me think this unit might have been imported. It's also worth checking Bluetooth as well to see that it works properly, as it seems to be something that Apple in particular like to break. In addition to that, we want to check that the radio works on both DAB and FM frequencies too. Last but not least on the checklist is the reverse camera, which should just work as it did in the previous unit, and if it doesn't, it may mean that the connector on the new head unit is damaged. Fortunately for me though, it's all good. So it's just a case of screwing the two screws back into the top of the head unit, clipping the aircon cover and faceplate back on, and then we can stand back and admire our new head unit. But before we get lost in admiration, what is it like to use? Is this thing actually any good? Overall, it's been a joy to use, and I can now agree with the many folks who recommended the upgrade, being that it is one of the more transformative upgrades you can give your Mk2 Aygo. Initially, I honestly didn't expect it to be as transformative as it has been. Before, for example, I was just content listening to music on my AirPods, and still am to a degree, but the ability to not only be able to control the music from the steering wheel, but to actually use Siri to change playlists or even find exact songs within playlists is really quite something. I was always opposed to voice controls in the past and regarded them as a bit silly, but in a car they are genuinely useful and not something you can really appreciate unless you actually use them yourself. And speaking of appreciation, if you're enjoying this video, why don't you just drop a like below? Now, it's here though that I do owe you an apology, because I might have given you the impression that I'm totally smitten with this upgrade, and for the most part I am, but there have been a few obstacles getting there, and I don't want you to think this will be plain sailing, because it likely won't be. Let's just take a look for a moment on the Toyota forums and just appreciate how many people have actually had issues with their units. It happened to me too. Here's what happened. My phone plugs into the USB socket and everything would load as normal. I'd then wait a bit only to be greeted by a black screen which would repeat like a doom loop even when restarting the car. The first suggestion was that the USB hub might be dodgy, but it was drawing power, so that wasn't it. The next suggestion was to update the firmware on the head unit at the cost of £250 from Toyota. Not a chance. But if you do need to go down this route, there may be people on the Toyota forum that can help you with that. But in the end, I ended up updating my iPhone to iOS 17 and it seemed to fix everything, but it took a good 2 or 3 hours to get there. Now, if you're thinking of buying a 3-button head unit for yourself, there are a couple of things you need to know. Chiefly, make sure you buy the right one. You are looking for this one, which is the 3-button DAB model. There's also another model with this alternative being the same but FM only, so you won't see this blue connector for the DAB. If you do want to turn your car into one that has DAB, you'll have to retrofit all the wiring. The second thing you have to watch out for is the cost. I paid £290 on eBay plus shipping, which brought it to a total of £305, and that's considered cheap as it has a slight blemish on the casing. My unit actually came out of a Peugeot 108 of a similar year, which is fine for your little Mk2 Aygo as they are the same car in all but name, which also includes the Citroen C1, and this swap will also work on cars that have the basic non-touch head unit and also the sat-nav module too. With the sat-nav module, you just need to make sure you unplug the correct USB connector to the hub, so going forward you can actually use the phone which will be doing the processing and not the sat-nav unit. If you do fancy looking for a cheap Apple Carplay Android Auto unit, the Europeans seem to get them much cheaper at about 100 to 150 euros, which is unfortunate for us in the UK, but we can't complain. After all, we asked for these Brexit benefits. So if you've got mates in the continent, now's the time to use them. If not, don't forget that you can pop your old 2-button model on eBay and recoup about £70 to £90. You also want to make sure that you are asking if the unit you are buying is plug and play or if it needs decoding, as some of them do get coded to the car. You don't want to be a further £200 in the hole because you forgot to ask. And the last question you probably want to ask is, how do I make this whole thing wireless? Well, you've got quite a few choices, but as ever, you need to check that the wireless adapter you are buying actually supports the Aygo. One that has been vetted on the Toyota forums is the one by Carplay, and terrible name aside, it's meant to work, but I decided to stay with my wired setup I currently use, and here's why. These adapters add extra cost and require Bluetooth that in a lot of cases introduces lag into the systems, or at the very least complication, which I'm not terribly eager to encourage. And also, the setup I have with this short 25cm USB cable works brilliantly, but the star of the show that makes it all come together is this phone holder, and I made a video all about it right here.